Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back to a time when you were not the only human on the planet. I want you to find a comfortable position, and just for a moment, let's go somewhere else entirely. Picture this. You're sitting on a cool, dusty rock, wrapped in the hide of some great, shaggy beast. Above you, the Milky Way is an incandescent river of light, brighter than you've ever seen it, untroubled by the faintest glow of a single city. The air is thin and cold, carrying the scent of pine needles and the distant tang of immense glaciers. From the small fire crackling in front of you, sparks spiral up into the darkness like short-lived orange stars. You hear the soft shuffle of others nearby, your family, your clan. And beyond the ring of firelight, you hear the snap of a twig. It could be a cave lion, a woolly rhino, or something else. Something that walks on two legs, but isn't quite like you. In this world, you are one of at least 9 different kinds of human walking the earth. And spoiler alert, in a one-on-one fight, you'd probably lose to most of them. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That small click sends a big signal to the algorithm. That long-form, serious educational content still matters. And to me, it's an incredibly meaningful show of support. Thank you so much for helping keep this channel going strong. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how this little community spans the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's lock in that time period. We are somewhere around 70,000 years ago. Geologically, you're living in the Pleistocene epoch, a fancy name for the Ice Age. Massive sheets of ice, kilometers thick, are squatting over much of North America and Europe. The sea levels are dramatically lower, creating land bridges where there is now open ocean. And the planet is prowled by megafauna, giant beasts that make today's elephants and bears seem like household pets. This is the world you, as an early Homo sapiens, have been born into. The most important thing to understand, the fact that changes everything, is that for almost the entire history of our species, we were never alone. The 300,000 years that Homo sapiens have been walking the earth is a mere blip in the grand scheme of human evolution. And for about 290,000 of those years, we shared this planet with other kinds of humans. Think about that. The world we live in now, with 8 billion people who are all, broadly speaking, the same, is the historical anomaly. It's the weird exception. For eons, being human meant looking across a valley and seeing a different type of human looking back. The state of nature for a Homo sapiens was not solitude, but a strange and complex family reunion. To begin this story, we have to start where all human stories begin. Africa. It's tempting to imagine our origin as a clean, simple starting line. A small group of our perfect ancestors in some East African Eden, who then marched out to conquer the world. The reality, as we are now discovering, was so much messier, so much more interesting. The African continent of 100,000 or 200,000 years ago wasn't a peaceful nursery. It was a crucible. It was a laboratory of human evolution where nature was running multiple experiments at once. Our direct ancestors were just one of several human models on the market. Paleontologists still argue passionately about the exact shape of the human family tree during this period, but it's clear it wasn't a straight trunk, but a tangled, thorny bush. Imagine the sheer variety. There were likely dozens of distinct populations, some of which were on their way to becoming different species, others that were evolutionary dead ends. There were archaic forms of humans who had been around for ages, robust and powerful people, and then there were graceful, lanky newcomers like us. We were the new kids on the block, and we were surrounded by our cousins. And just like any family, things were complicated. We competed with them for resource, for territory. We almost certainly fought with them. And as we will see in startling detail, we also interbred with them. The story of our journey out of Africa isn't a story of a pure-blooded people venturing into the unknown. It's the story of a hybrid, a survivor of the African crucible, carrying the genetic ghosts of our continental cousins with us. So, before we take that first great step into the wider world, we need to meet some of the family we'd be leaving behind. We need to travel deep into a cave in modern-day South Africa, wiggling through passages so tight they are nicknamed Superman's Crawl and Dragon's Back, to find one of the most enigmatic and baffling humans ever discovered. A creature that existed alongside our earliest ancestors, a being that challenges our very definition of what it means to be human. Your journey takes you to a place now called the Cradle of Humankind, a rolling landscape of limestone and grassland in South Africa. Here, a network of caves spiders its way through the rock, a silent archive of deep time. In 2013, a pair of local cavers squeezed through a narrow crack in the floor of one of these caves, the Rising Star. They descended into a chamber, and then another, until they found a chute, a vertical crack in the rock barely 18 centimeters or 7 inches wide. They dropped down this tight passage, 12 meters straight down, and landed in a chamber that no human had entered for hundreds of thousands of years. The floor of that chamber was carpeted with bones. And the bones were human, but not quite. What they found has been both a breakthrough and a beautiful headache for science. The discovery of a new human species, Homo naledi. To even retrieve the fossils, the lead paleoanthropologist Lee Berger had to put out a call on social media for excavators who were, to put it politely, exceptionally slender. He needed scientists who could fit through that 7-inch slot. The team he assembled, the underground astronauts, were all small women, and they became the first to professionally excavate one of the most incredible fossil sites ever found. So let's picture this lost relative. Homo naledi was a curious mosaic, a creature assembled from the spare parts bin of human evolution. They stood about 4.5 feet tall, slender and wiry. Their shoulders were built for climbing, with long, curved fingers, almost ape-like, perfect for gripping branches. Yet their wrists and palms were surprisingly modern. Their legs were long and built for upright walking, but their feet were a little flatter than yours, their toes a little more curved. They were a bipedal, walking human who was still very much at home in the trees. But the most shocking feature was the head. Perched atop this human-like body was a skull containing a brain no larger than an orange, about 5 cubic centimeters. For context, your brain is roughly 3 times that size. This is a brain capacity you'd expect to see in a hominin from 2 or 3 million years ago, like an Australopithecine. And yet, the shape of the brain, inferred from the inside of the skull, shows hints of a more modern structure. Paleoanthropologists are still fiercely debating what to make of them. Are they a surviving relic of a much earlier branch of the human family tree? A kind of living fossil? Or are they a strange new experiment? A species that evolved its own unique path, proving there's more than one way to be human. Initially, Scientists assumed that with such a primitive, small brain, naledi must be incredibly ancient. But the biggest shock came from the dating. The scientific evidence, derived from the rock layers and the bones themselves, placed Homo naledi as living between 335,000 and 236,000 years ago. This is a stunning revelation. Our own species, Homo sapiens, first emerged around 300,000 years ago. This means that for tens of thousands of years, some of the very first modern humans, your distant ancestors living in the plains of Africa, shared the landscape with these small-brained, climbing people. Imagine that encounter. You, with your large brain, capable of crafting complex tools and perhaps the first whispers of complex language, coming across a troop of these lithe, almost elfin figures. Would you recognize the kinship? Or would you see them as just another strange animal in a world already full of them? The final and most profound mystery of Homo naledi lies back in that cave. How did over 1,500 bones belonging to at least 15 different individuals of all ages end up in a chamber so profoundly difficult to reach? There are no tooth marks from predators, no signs they were washed in by a flood. They didn't fall in by accident, not down that narrow chute. The leading theory, controversial as it is that the other naledi put them there. That this small-brained human was deliberately and repeatedly taking its dead deep into the darkness of the earth, a journey that would have been perilous even with torches, and leaving them in this final resting place. If true, this is evidence of ritual, of a complex emotional response to death. It suggests a mind capable of understanding symbolism and perhaps even a nascent form of spirituality, all powered by a brain 1/3 the size of your own. It's a humbling thought. It tells us that the link between brain size and intelligence, or soulfulness, is far more complicated than we ever believed. And it's just one of the many human stories playing out on the African stage before we ever took our first steps beyond it. The story of Homo naledi is astonishing because of the physical evidence they left behind. A chamber full of bones that tell a story. But some of our lost relatives are even more mysterious, so ephemeral that we have no bones at all. They exist only as whispers in the DNA of living people today. These are the ghost populations. They are species of archaic humans whose entire existence is inferred from the strange, ancient-looking strands of genetic code found woven into our own. Finding their story isn't a matter of digging in a cave. It's about a different kind of archaeology, an excavation of the human genome itself. For this, our journey takes us from the southern tip of Africa to the lush forests and savannas of West Africa. Here, geneticists studying the DNA of modern populations, like the Yoruba of Nigeria and the Mende of Sierra Leone, noticed something strange. Their computer models kept flagging certain genetic sequences as different. These sequences didn't look like modern human DNA, nor did they match the DNA of the Neanderthals or the other known archaic groups. After years of careful work, they came to an incredible conclusion. The genomes of many modern West Africans contain a significant contribution, somewhere between 2% and 19%, from an extinct human population that we have never found. A ghost. This is a profoundly strange idea to wrap your head around. It means that somewhere in Africa's past, there was another kind of human, different enough from us to leave a distinct genetic signature, who lived and thrived for thousands of years. They were successful enough and lived in close enough proximity to your ancestors that they interbred. Not just once or twice, but often enough for their genetic legacy to be a substantial part of the local populations today. And yet, this entire species is, for now, completely invisible to the fossil record. Geneticists and paleoanthropologists are now in a thrilling race, searching for skeletal remains in West Africa that might finally give a face to this genetic ghost. But until then, all we can do is wonder. Let's place you back in time, in that vibrant, competitive African landscape. You are part of a small band of Homo sapiens moving through a dense, humid forest. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth and blooming flowers. You're tracking game, your senses on high alert. And then you see them. What did this ghost population look like? The DNA can't tell us that. Were they tall and lanky, short and powerful? Did their faces have the pronounced brow ridges of more archaic humans? Or did they look something like us? We have no idea. The only thing the science is sure of is that the encounter happened. That your people and their people saw each other, not as monsters or as animals, but as something familiar enough to be recognized as fellow humans. Imagine the interactions. Perhaps they were tense, full of suspicion. Perhaps there were moments of shared understanding, a trade of food or tools. There may have been conflict, but clearly there were also moments of connection, of kinship, of love. Children were born from these unions, children who carried the legacy of both lineages. These children grew up and had children of their own, passing that unique genetic inheritance down through the generations. A silent thread of memory winding its way through millennia, all the way to the present day. This quirky and frankly mind-bending fact that entire species of humans can exist only as faint echoes in our blood is a crucial piece of our story. It shatters the simple idea of our origins. Before your ancestors ever set foot outside of Africa, they were already a composite, a blend. The crucible of African evolution, with its intense competition and diversity, had already forged us into a hybrid species. We were not a pure, single lineage marching out to meet the world. We were a rich tapestry, woven from the threads of many different human experiments. We carry the legacy of the small-brained naledi, who may have buried their dead, and we carry the genetic imprint of the West African ghosts we can't even name. We are a product of mingling, of adaptation, of a messy, complicated, and deeply interconnected family history. And it is this adaptable, blended, and genetically diverse human that is now poised around 70,000 years ago to take the next great step. The step out of the homeland and into a much wider and much stranger world. And so, you decide to leave. It's not a grand, singular event. There is no committee meeting, no map drawn in the sand. It's a slow, generational drift. A family group, perhaps your own, follows a herd of gazelles a little further north than usual. The next season, their children wander further still. Scarcity pushes you. Curiosity pulls you. The reason is lost to time, but the genetic evidence is clear. Somewhere around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, a relatively small group of Homo sapiens, maybe only a few hundred or 1,000 individuals, made a successful and permanent journey out of Africa. And from that tiny founding population, every single non-African on Earth today is descended. You are one of them. You are that hybrid human we spoke of, carrying the genetic echoes of your African cousins, and now you stand at a crossroads. Archaeologists and geneticists still debate the exact route and timing of this critical migration. Perhaps you take the northern route, following a temporary green corridor. For thousands of years, the climate would periodically shift in a cycle known as the Saharan pump. The great desert would bloom, turning into a lush savanna of lakes and rivers, a walkable path leading you to the Sinai Peninsula and into the Levant. You would walk through a land of plenty, a fleeting paradise between two continents. Or maybe you take the southern route. You stand on the coast of what is now Djibouti, looking across the Red Sea at the shores of Arabia. During this phase of the Ice Age, so much of the world's water is locked up in glaciers that the sea level is dramatically lower. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Gate of Tears, is not a wide channel of open ocean, but a narrow string of islands you can practically hop across. You build a simple raft, or perhaps you just wait for low tide and wade through the shallows. You feel the salt spray on your face as you leave the continent of your birth behind forever, your feet touching the sands of Asia for the first time. Whichever path you take, you are not a pioneer in the truest sense. You are not the first human to see this new world. It's a crucial historical fact that other, earlier humans had been making this journey for an astonishingly long time. Homo erectus first strode out of Africa nearly 2 million years ago. Other waves of archaic humans followed. The footprints you leave in the dust are laid down inside the much older, much fainter footprints of your deep ancestors. But this time, it's different. This time, you are not just exploring. This time, you are here to stay. The world you step into is both familiar and profoundly alien. The sun and moon are the same, but the stars in the night sky begin to shift. The air itself feels different. You come from a world ruled by 2 seasons, wet and dry. You are now entering a world of 4. For the first time, you experience a true, deep winter. You see snow fall from the sky, a soft white dust that blankets the landscape and muffles all sound. You learn to track animals in this new medium, to prepare for the coming cold, to store food in a way your ancestors never had to. The plants are different, the birds sing in a different key, and the animals? The animals are from a storybook of monsters and giants. As you push further north and west, you see them. Herds of woolly mammoths, their great curved tusks sweeping the snow aside as they graze. Shaggy, bad-tempered woolly rhinos, built like living, battering rams. Giant deer with antlers as wide as a hut, and cave lions larger than any predator you have ever known. This is the Pleistocene megafauna. Your survival depends on learning their ways, on figuring out how to hunt them without being trampled, gored, or eaten. It requires new tools, new strategies, and a new level of cooperation. You are a tropical primate, now adrift in a frozen world, forced to adapt or die. And you are about to discover that the most dangerous and most interesting new creature you will meet in this land is not a mammoth or a lion. It is another kind of human. You and your small band of people, this tiny offshoot of humanity, have made it. You've survived the journey out of Africa and have pushed into the region we now call the Middle East. You find a sheltered valley, cut by a small river, dotted with caves that offer refuge from the biting winds. It feels like a good place. There's water, game animals migrate through the valley, and there are flint nodules weathering out of the limestone cliffs, perfect for making your sharp, elegant stone points. You are starting to feel at home, but you are not the first to have this thought. This valley, this entire continent stretching out before you, is already someone else's home. They have been here for over 200,000 years, perfectly adapted to this colder, harsher world. They are the true northerners. They are the Neanderthals. The first encounter is quiet, anticlimactic. It's not a clash of spears. One evening, as the sun sets and the air grows cold, you catch a scent on the wind that is both familiar and strange. It's the smell of wood smoke, but it's not from your fire. The next day, your hunting party is tracking a wild ass along a ridge when you see them. Down in the valley below, another group of figures is expertly butchering a kill. You freeze. You gesture for your companions to get down, to hide behind a screen of thorny bushes. You watch. They are unmistakably human. They walk on two legs, they work together, they use tools. But they are also different. Their bodies are built on a completely different chassis than yours. Where you are tall and slender, built for endurance and efficiently shedding heat in the African sun, they are shorter and incredibly robust. Their chests are broad and deep, like barrels, and their limbs are thick with muscle. They are radiating power. You get the sense that in a contest of pure brute strength, you wouldn't stand a chance. Their heads are shaped differently too. Long and low, not high and domed like yours. At the back of the skull, there's a distinctive swelling, a feature paleontologists will one day call an occipital bun. But it's the face that truly mesmerizes you. It's a face built for the cold. A heavy, projecting brow ridge juts out over their eyes like a built-in visor. Their jaw is large and lacks the pointy, prominent chin that is so characteristic of your own people. And then there's the nose. It's huge, wide, and projecting. Scientists still debate the exact function of that prominent nose. Perhaps it was like a radiator, its large internal volume serving to warm and moisten the frigid, dry Ice Age air before it hit their lungs. Or maybe it simply housed a more acute sense of smell. Whatever the reason, it dominates their face, making them look entirely alien and yet somehow deeply human. You watch them work. Their movements are efficient, practiced. They laugh, a deep guttural sound that carries on the wind. One of them tends to a small child who has the same stocky build as the adults. You see a family, a people. They are dressed in heavy hides, their skin likely much fairer than your own, an adaptation to the weaker northern sun. Everything about them speaks of a long, successful tenure in this land. They are not struggling newcomers. They are the establishment. As you lie there, hidden, your heart pounding, 1,000 questions run through your mind. What are they? Are they people, like you? Or are they something else? A clever type of animal? A spirit of the land? The very concept that there could be another kind of people is a cognitive bomb. You see them as rivals for this valley, for the game, for the very right to exist here. You see them as a threat. But perhaps you also feel a flicker of something else, a curiosity, a sense of kinship with these other, strange, two-legged beings who also huddle around fires and care for their young. The world has just become infinitely more complex. You are no longer the sole measure of what it means to be human. And as you quietly retreat back to your own camp, you know that this is just the beginning. The story of your two peoples is now intertwined, for better or for worse. As the days and weeks turn into months, you continue to observe these other people from a distance. Your initial fear, that raw, primal sense of the unknown, begins to give way to a grudging respect. You need to forget the old caricatures, the brutish, club-dragging cavemen from cartoons. That image, born from the misinterpretation of a single arthritic Neanderthal skeleton found in the early 20th century, is one of the most persistent and unfair slanders in all of history. The reality you are witnessing is far more complex. The beings you are sharing this valley with are not subhuman brutes. They are intelligent, they are resourceful, and they are masters of their world. Let's start with what's inside their heads. If you could somehow measure it, you'd find that the average Neanderthal brain was not smaller than yours. It was, in fact, slightly larger. The average Neanderthal brain volume was around 1600 cm3, while yours, as a modern human, is closer to 1400 cm3. Now, brain size isn't a simple measure of intelligence, but it immediately tells you that you are not dealing with a cognitively challenged creature. The difference wasn't in size, but in shape and organization. An endocast, a model of the brain made from the inside of the skull, shows us that their brains were longer and lower. More of their brain mass was dedicated to the occipital lobe, the part at the back that processes visual information. This is a fascinating tidbit. It might mean they had better vision than you, especially in the dim grey light of the long Ice Age winters. A valuable adaptation for sure. Conversely, they seem to have had smaller parietal lobes, the region of the brain that in our species is a critical hub for, among other things, social networking, complex tool use, and abstract thought. Scientists are still debating what these differences in brain organization truly meant for their day-to-day consciousness and capabilities, but it suggests they might have perceived and interacted with the world in a fundamentally different way. Their intelligence was not a lesser version of yours, but perhaps a different kind of smart altogether. You see this intelligence in the tools they leave behind at their abandoned campsites. They don't carry crude clubs. They carry an elegant and highly effective stone toolkit, what archaeologists call the Mousterian industry. Their signature technique is known as the Levallois method, and it's a process that shows incredible foresight. A Neanderthal toolmaker doesn't just smash two rocks together. They take a large piece of flint, a core, and carefully chip away at the edges, preparing it, shaping it, like a sculptor planning their masterpiece. All this work is in preparation for a single, final, perfectly placed strike, which detaches a flake of a predetermined size and shape, a perfect spear point, a scraper, or a knife. It's a multi-step process that exists entirely in the toolmaker's mind before they even begin. It requires skill, patience, and the ability to think abstractly about cause and effect. You see their intelligence most clearly in the hunt. These are not timid scavengers, picking at the leftovers of other predators. They are the apex predators of Ice Age Europe. You watch them take down animals that you and your clan would shy away from. Their skeletons are found with the fossil remains of mammoths, woolly rhinos, bison, and even cave bears. Hunting these animals with their technology, which consisted of heavy, stone-tipped thrusting spears, was incredibly dangerous. It wasn't a matter of throwing something from a safe distance. It was a face-to-face, brutal confrontation. It required immense courage, but it also required sophisticated cooperation. They had to work as a team, anticipating the animals' moves and each other's actions. They had to communicate, plan, and execute. As you watch them, you realize with a sobering clarity that you haven't just stumbled into the territory of some primitive relic. You have met a rival, an equal, and the contest for this new world has just begun. From your vantage point, you begin to piece together the rhythm of their lives. Their social world seems to revolve around a small, close-knit family group, a clan of perhaps 10 to 20 individuals. At the heart of their camp, a well-tended fire is a constant presence, a focus for warmth, for cooking, for community. You watch the elders patiently teaching the youngsters how to knap flint, their large, powerful hands guiding the smaller ones with surprising delicacy. You see them sharing food, working together, and moving through the landscape with an intimacy that speaks of generations of accumulated knowledge. They know which roots are safe to eat, where the best flint can be found, and how to predict the movements of the great herds. But it's not their skill that leaves the deepest impression on you. It's their compassion. In your own clan, a severely injured member is a liability, a mouth to feed who cannot contribute. While you would never be overtly cruel, the harsh calculus of survival often dictates a grim outcome. These people, you notice, operate differently. You see one of the older males in their group. He moves slowly, stiffly. His right arm hangs uselessly at his side, and he seems to be half blind, turning his head at sharp angles to see properly. In your world, he would have been left behind seasons ago. Here, he is protected. The others bring him the choicest cuts of meat. They give him simple tasks to do around the camp. He is a respected elder, not a burden. This observation is a profound insight into their humanity, and it's backed by the stories frozen in their bones. Far away, in a cave in the Zagros Mountains of modern-day Iraq, archaeologists will one day unearth the skeleton of a Neanderthal just like this one. They will call him Shanidar I, the Old Man of Shanidar. The fossil evidence will show he lived a life of insheddable hardship and pain. A crushing blow to the left side of his face, sustained in his youth, had shattered his eye socket, likely leaving him partially or fully blind in that eye. His right arm was withered and had been amputated above the elbow. He was probably deaf in one ear and walked with a painful, limping gait due to a badly healed fracture in his foot. He was, by any measure, a cripple in a world of apex predators. And yet he lived to be around 40 or 50 years old, a ripe old age for a Neanderthal. He could not have hunted. He could not have defended himself effectively. His survival is the single most powerful piece of evidence for Neanderthal compassion. For decades, his clan must have fed him, protected him, and guided him. They saw his value beyond his physical utility. They saw a person. As you listen to them around their fire, you hear their voices. They are not a series of grunts and snarls. There is a cadence, a rhythm to their interactions. Scholars still argue whether their vocal anatomy and the size of the hypoglossal canal, the nerve channel for the tongue, could support complex speech. For a long time, it was assumed they couldn't speak like us. Then, in 1989, a tiny U-shaped bone called a hyoid was discovered with a Neanderthal skeleton in Israel. The hyoid bone is critical for speech, anchoring the tongue. And this Neanderthal hyoid was virtually identical to yours. They had the hardware. So, what did they sound like? Based on the structure of their throat and nasal cavity, some scientists speculate their voices were likely higher pitched and more nasal than ours. A strange yet fully human sound. But for all this community and compassion, their existence is brutally hard. Their bones tell a story of relentless physical trauma. The scientific evidence from their skeletons shows an astonishing rate of healed fractures. The pattern of injuries, concentrated on the head, neck, and torso, most closely resembles that of one specific group of modern humans, professional rodeo riders. This is the result of their hunting strategy, which we saw earlier. Constantly getting up close and personal with massive, thrashing animals. It was a life of unbelievable risk. Very few Neanderthals lived past the age of 40. Their cemeteries are filled with the young. Theirs is an existence of incredible resilience, of caring for one another in a world that seems determined to break them. For a creature to survive, it must be strong and clever. But for a creature to be truly human, perhaps it needs something more. A sense of wonder, an appreciation for beauty, the desire to make its mark, to say, I was here, to a universe that seems vast and indifferent. As you continue to watch the Neanderthals, you begin to see flashes of this deeper, more artistic soul. You see signs that their minds are not solely occupied with the grim business of survival. They are also concerned with symbolism. You notice it in the traces of color around their camp. They collect lumps of soft, earthy minerals, ochre, in shades of deep red, yellow, and black. They grind it into a fine powder. What for? You see them mixing it with animal fat to help preserve hides, a practical use. But you also see them smearing it on their own bodies, painting lines on their skin in some pattern whose meaning is known only to them. You see them using it to color the shafts of their spears or to draw on flat pieces of rock. This isn't about survival. This is about aesthetics. It's about making the world and themselves a little more vibrant. They wear jewelry. At a site in what is now Croatia, archaeologists will dig up a set of 8 white-tailed eagle talons. The scientific evidence is unmistakable. The talons show multiple cut marks, smoothing and polishing, and they are notched in a way that suggests they were strung together, likely as a necklace or a bracelet. This was not accidental. It was a deliberate, symbolic act. Imagine one of the powerful Neanderthal hunters you've been watching, a necklace of giant eagle claws resting against his broad chest. It's a statement, a symbol of power, of skill, of a connection to one of the most magnificent predators of the sky. And they seem to have had a particular fondness for feathers. Analysis of their campsites shows they were selectively hunting birds like raptors and corvids, eagles, falcons, and crows, but they weren't always eating them. They were carefully removing the long, dark, glossy flight feathers. This is the quirky little detail that breathes so much life into them. They had a preference, an artistic choice. They liked the dramatic, dark feathers, perhaps to wear in their hair, to adorn their clothing, or for some ritual purpose we can only guess at. But the most profound, world-changing evidence of their inner life lies deep inside a cave. For a century, we believed that art, true art, was our invention, the exclusive domain of the big-brained, clever Homo sapiens. Then, scientists developed a new way to date the thin layer of calcite that forms over ancient cave paintings. They used it on some art in a series of caves in Spain. The paintings themselves are abstract, red, ladder-like shapes, arrays of dots, and most hauntingly, hand stencils. A Neanderthal placing their hand against the cold stone and blowing pigment over it, leaving a negative impression, an echo of a presence, a signature. The date that came back from the tests was 65,000 years ago. This is a mainstream historical fact that turned Paleoanthropology on its head. Homo sapiens would not arrive in this part of Europe for another 20,000 years. There is no ambiguity. The artists who made these paintings, the very first cave artists on Earth, were Neanderthals. Think about what this means. In the flickering torchlight of a deep cave, a Neanderthal was not just seeking shelter. They were creating. Archaeologists may never agree on the precise meaning of these abstract symbols, but their intent is clear. They were imposing order on the world, creating meaning, and communicating something to others in their group, or perhaps to the spirits they believed in, or even to the future. As you, the sapiens newcomer, peer into the world of these people, you realize the gulf between you is not as wide as you thought. Their minds are not just homes for thoughts of tools and food. They are also homes for ideas, for beauty, for mystery. They have an inner world, a spiritual life, a culture. And this realization makes the coming decades of interaction all the more poignant and all the more complex. So, you now have a clearer picture of your new neighbors. They are not simple beasts, but a complex people with their own technology, their own compassion, their own art, and a rich inner world. With this knowledge, the dynamic in the valley changes. It is no longer a simple matter of a human observing a strange animal. It is now a relationship between two distinct cultures, two intelligent peoples vying for the same slice of a harsh and unforgiving world. This period of coexistence stretches for thousands upon thousands of years, a long, slow dance of avoidance, competition, and occasional contact. For much of the time, you likely keep your distance. You see their hunting parties on a far ridge and decide to hunt in the opposite direction. You find one of their recently abandoned campsites and scavenge for any dropped tools or scraps of hide, and you know they do the same to yours. The landscape is large enough, most of the time, for a kind of wary segregation. You are two peoples sharing a continent, each aware of the other, each carving out a territory and a life. But the world is not always large enough. You both favor the same sheltered caves, the same river crossings where the herds are predictable. Inevitably, there is friction, there is competition, and sometimes there is violence. Back in Shanidar Cave, the same place the old man was found, another Neanderthal skeleton tells a different, darker story. Embedded in the rib cage of this individual is a wound from a stone spear point. Scientific analysis of the cut marks and the type of fracture suggests the weapon was thrown from a distance with great velocity. This was not a close-quarters hunting accident. This was an attack by a weapon that was a hallmark of your people, Homo sapiens, the lightweight, thrown spear. While we can't know for certain who threw it, it stands as stark, silent evidence that some encounters between our species were hostile and deadly. Yet conflict is not the whole story. As you continue to live side by side, something else begins to happen. A transfer of ideas. In caves in France and Spain, a unique style of tool appears in the archaeological record around 45,000 years ago, right at the time of your two peoples' overlap in the region. It's called the Châtelperronian industry. It's a curious hybrid. The base technology is clearly Neanderthal, an evolution of their classic Mysterian toolkit. But it includes new items that are distinctly sapiens in style. Long, elegant flint blades, and even primitive jewelry like grooved animal teeth. Archaeologists are still locked in a fascinating debate over the Châtelperronian. Who made it? For a long time, it was assumed to be the work of your sapiens ancestors, adopting some local techniques. But recent discoveries have found these tools directly associated with Neanderthal skeletons. This means the Neanderthals themselves were making it. So, the question becomes, did they invent these new ideas on their own? A sudden burst of innovation? Or were they copying you? Were they seeing the jewelry and the fine blades of the newcomers and trying to imitate them? But there's a third, more humbling possibility. Perhaps you were the one doing the learning. As the tropical newcomer, you were poorly adapted for life in Ice Age Europe. The Neanderthals, on the other hand, had been surviving and thriving there for over 200,000 years. It's entirely plausible that they were the ones teaching you, directly or indirectly, how to survive. Maybe you copied their techniques for processing hides to make warmer clothing, or learned from them which specific wood made the best spear shafts. The flow of information was likely not a one-way street. This long, complicated relationship, with its moments of violence, its periods of avoidance, and its hints of cultural exchange, ultimately leads to one final, undeniable form of contact. The ultimate proof that at least some of your encounters were not hostile, but deeply personal. Because beyond the stone tools and the healed wounds, the most enduring legacy of this shared time is the one they left written inside your own body, in the very code of your existence. For decades, this was the great, unanswerable question. We had the bones and the tools, the hints of violence and the whispers of art, but the true nature of the relationship between your ancestors and the Neanderthals remained locked in silence. Did that initial moment of uncertainty you felt, seeing them for the first time, ever resolve into recognition? Did you ever see them not just as rivals, but as fellow people? The answer, it turns out, was hiding in the most intimate place imaginable: your own DNA. The story of this discovery is a scientific epic in itself. For years, a team led by the Swedish geneticist Svante Pääbo, work for which he would eventually win the Nobel Prize, toiled on a seemingly impossible task. They were trying to read the genetic code of beings who had been dead for 50,000 years. Ancient DNA is a mess. It's fragmented, degraded, and heavily contaminated with the DNA of bacteria and fungi, and even the modern humans who handle the bones. But through painstaking effort and the invention of new technologies, they did it. They drilled tiny amounts of powder from Neanderthal bones, pieced together the shattered fragments of their genetic code, and rebuilt the Neanderthal genome. And once they had it, they could compare it to ours. The result was a revelation that changed our understanding of our own species forever. They found that every person on Earth with ancestry outside of sub-Saharan Africa carries a small but significant amount of Neanderthal DNA. The number is usually between 1% and 2%. That may not sound like much, but when you add it up across billions of people, it means that a huge portion, perhaps half, of the entire Neanderthal genome is still alive today, just scattered in small pieces amongst all of us. Geneticists still debate precisely where and how many times these interbreeding events occurred, but the leading theory is that the most significant mingling happened in the Middle East, shortly after your ancestors first left Africa, with other smaller events happening later as you spread across Asia. A quirky little finding is that modern East Asians actually have slightly more Neanderthal DNA than modern Europeans, hinting at a more complex story than we first imagined. This inherited DNA is not just some silent, useless passenger in your cells. It's a functional part of your genetic toolkit, a package of welcome to the neighborhood genes that the Neanderthals gifted you. Think of it as a biological cheat sheet. Your ancestors were tropical primates adapted to an African environment. The Neanderthals had spent hundreds of thousands of years adapting to the pathogens, the diet, and the climate of Eurasia. By interbreeding with them, you acquired their successful genetic solutions in a single generation. Much of the DNA you inherited is related to your immune system. You received genes that helped you recognize and fight off the local viruses and bacteria that your African immune system had never encountered before. You also inherited genes that affect the production of keratin, the protein that makes up your skin, hair, and nails. This likely gave you skin and hair better adapted to the lower levels of ultraviolet light and the biting cold of the north. In essence, the Neanderthals gave you a survival pack. But this ancient inheritance comes with a few strings attached in our modern world. Some of those same immune genes that were so helpful against Ice Age parasites can make your immune system overreact in our hyper-clean environments, leading to allergies. Other Neanderthal genes are linked to an increased risk for blood clotting, depression, and even type 2 diabetes. It's a potent reminder that a gene that is beneficial in one environment can have unexpected consequences in another. So the next time you look in the mirror, remember this. The story of the Neanderthals does not end with their extinction. It ends with us. They are not a separate, failed branch of the human tree that was pruned away by evolution. They are part of our roots. They are the silent contributors to who you are today. That long period of coexistence, of competition and curiosity, culminated in moments of genuine human connection. The ultimate proof of their humanity isn't in their tools or their art. It's in the fact that your ancestors saw them, at least some of the time, as partners, as family. A whisper of their ancient lineage lives on in your cells. A 50,000-year-old echo of a time when you were not alone. Your story with the Neanderthals is a long and deeply entangled one, a multi-generational saga of sharing a continent. But your people are restless. Not every group stays in the Middle East or pushes west into Europe. Some bands turn east. Anthropologists still discuss the precise pressures that drove this eastward expansion. Was it the pressure of your own growing population? Was it a shift in the climate that opened a new corridor? Or was it simply that primal human impulse to see what lies beyond the next horizon? Whatever the reason, your family group is one of those that turns its back to the setting sun and begins a long, slow drift into the vast, unknown heart of Asia. You leave the wooded valleys of the Levant behind and enter a new world. The landscape opens up into something immense, a seemingly endless sea of grass under an impossibly wide sky. This is the Eurasian steppe. For as far as you can see in every direction, the world is a flat, wind-swept plain, broken only by the occasional rolling hill or river valley. The winters here are even more brutal than those you've grown accustomed to. The wind's a constant, scouring force that steals the warmth from your body. Survival here is a different kind of challenge. There are few caves for shelter, so you learn to build huts from mammoth bones and hides. The herds of bison, horse, and saiga antelope are your lifeblood, and you follow their migrations across the immense, featureless grasslands. It is a lonely existence in a land that feels empty. But you know by now that no land is ever truly empty. Just as you entered the domain of the Neanderthals in the west, you are now entering the homeland of another people in the east. They are more elusive than the Neanderthals. Their populations perhaps spread more thinly across this enormous territory. You might catch only fleeting glimpses of them. A strange footprint by a riverbank, the smoke of a distant fire that vanishes by morning, a figure watching you from a hilltop who disappears when you look too closely. You know you are not alone. But the people who live here are not Neanderthals. They are something else entirely. A mystery. For thousands of years this mystery would remain, a ghost in the Asian landscape. And then, in the summer of 2008, a team of Russian archaeologists was excavating in a place called Denisova Cave, nestled in the foothills of the Altai Mountains in southern Siberia. This cave is a special place, a natural crossroads. Over hundreds of thousands of years, its strategic location has made it a desirable piece of real estate for any and all humans passing through. The archaeologists were digging through layers of sediment packed with the tools and bones of all the cave's past residents. In a layer dated to between 50,000 and 75,000 years ago, a Russian archaeologist named Alexander Sibankov found a tiny, almost insignificant piece of bone. It was the very tip of a pinky finger, so small it could have belonged to a child. The bone was exceptionally well preserved by the cold, dry conditions in the cave. It was so pristine, in fact, that at first the team didn't think it was particularly ancient. Still, they carefully bagged it and sent it off for analysis. It ended up in the laboratory of Svante Pääbo, the very same scientist who was working on the Neanderthal genome. His team took a small sample to analyze its mitochondrial DNA, the small loop of genetic material that is passed down only from the mother. The assumption was that it would be a Neanderthal, as their remains had been found in the region before, or perhaps an early modern human. It was a routine test. No one was expecting a revolution. No one was prepared for what that tiny fragment of a child's finger was about to tell them about the story of humanity, and about the ghosts your ancestors were meeting on the vast, cold steppe. The lab technicians ran the routine test on the sample from the Siberian pinky bone, and the results came back. They ran it again, and a third time, because the results made no sense. The mitochondrial DNA sequence that emerged from their machines was not from a Homo sapiens, but it also wasn't from a Neanderthal. It was something else entirely, a deep human lineage that was profoundly different from any other that had ever been recorded. The lead scientists in Germany received the data and stared at their screens in disbelief. That tiny, forgotten fragment of bone from a young girl's hand wasn't just another fossil. It was the key that unlocked the existence of an entirely new branch of the human family. This was a genetic bombshell. For the first time in history, a new species of human had been discovered, not by a paleoanthropologist painstakingly reassembling a crushed skull, but by a geneticist reading a string of letters, A, C, T, and G, from a computer. The elusive people of the steppe, the ghosts your ancestors had glimpsed from afar, finally had a name, taken from the cave where they were found. The Denisovans. So who were these mysterious people? The frustrating and fascinating truth is, we barely know. The Denisovans are the ultimate human enigma. Their entire physical existence in the fossil record consists of that one pinky bone tip, 3 enormous molars with a unique-looking root structure, a few scattered bone fragments from the same cave, and a single, robust jawbone found on the Tibetan plateau. That's it. That is the entire physical library for a species that spanned a continent. Paleoanthropologists can only offer educated guesses about what the Denisovans actually looked like. Based on the size of the jaw and the teeth, they were likely large and powerfully built. Genetic analysis of their DNA suggests they may have had dark skin, dark hair, and dark eyes. But beyond that, they are phantoms. Yet from that one tiny, perfectly preserved finger bone, scientists were eventually able to extract and sequence the entire Denisovan nuclear genome, just as they had for the Neanderthals. And this is where the ghosts began to take shape. The genetic data revealed that the Denisovans were a sister group to the Neanderthals. Their story begins with a shared ancestor that moved out of Africa long before us, perhaps 500,000 years ago. This population then split. The group that went west into Europe and the Middle East became the Neanderthals. The group that went east into Asia became the Denisovans. Their lineages are thought to have diverged somewhere around 400,000 years ago, and their range was immense. We know this not from fossils, but from the genetic legacy they, like the Neanderthals, left in modern humans. Their DNA tells us they were not just confined to the frigid mountains of Siberia. They lived all across Asia, likely adapting to a huge variety of environments, from the high-altitude Tibetan plateau to the humid tropical jungles of Southeast Asia. You, on your long trek eastward, were not just passing through the fringes of their territory. You were walking straight into the heart of the Denisovan world. This brings us back to Denisova Cave. With this new knowledge, the cave transforms from a simple archaeological site into something much more profound. It becomes a Paleolithic meeting point, a crossroads of humanity. As archaeologists have continued to excavate, they have found definitive evidence in the cave's layers of all three major human groups. There were Denisovans, the original residents. There were Neanderthals, who periodically moved in, perhaps during warmer climatic phases. And eventually, there was you, Homo sapiens, who also used the cave as a shelter. For tens of thousands of years, this single spot on the map was a stage where the entire drama of human interaction in Asia played out. It was a place of coming and going, of coexistence, and, as one astonishing discovery would prove, a place of hybrids. That unique role of Denisova Cave as a Paleolithic meeting point, a place where different human worlds collided, was cemented by the discovery of another tiny piece of bone. In 2012, another fragment was found, this one from a layer dated to around 90,000 years ago. On the surface, it was even less impressive than the first pinky bone. It was a shard from a long bone, like an arm or a leg, and so nondescript that scientists couldn't even tell what species it belonged to just by looking at it. But by now, the team at the Max Planck Institute knew that the most unremarkable-looking bones from this cave could hold the most remarkable secrets. They drilled into the fragment, which they labeled Denisova 11, and sequenced its genome. The results that came back were so shocking, so statistically improbable, that the lead geneticist initially thought his team had made a mistake in the lab. The DNA analysis showed, with absolute clarity, that the teenage girl to whom this bone had belonged had a mother who was 100% Neanderthal, and a father who was 100% Denisovan. Let that sink in. This wasn't a human with a small percentage of ancestry from another group. This was the direct, first-generation offspring of a union between two entirely different kinds of human. They gave her the nickname Denny, and she is arguably the single most important human fossil ever found. She is the most direct evidence of interspecies relationships that we could ever hope to find. Denny proves that the interactions between Neanderthals and Denisovans were not just a theoretical possibility inferred from statistics. They were real. A Neanderthal woman and a Denisovan man met, formed a bond, and had a child. It is a stunningly intimate and personal snapshot of life 90,000 years ago. It transforms our picture of the past from one of separate, competing groups to one of a deeply interconnected and, frankly, very complicated human family. Denny's father's DNA also contained faint traces of his own Neanderthal ancestors, meaning these interactions had been happening for generations. This wasn't a one-time event. It was a recurring feature of life at this human crossroads. And as your sapiens ancestors began to push through these same landscapes, you too became part of this story of mingling. Anthropologists can only speculate on the social dynamics of these encounters. Were they peaceful exchanges between curious groups? Were they the tragic outcomes of conflict? Or were they simply a case of individuals from small, isolated populations seeking partners outside their own limited gene pool. Whatever the context, the result is written in the genomes of people alive today. As you and your people moved through Asia, you also met and interbred with the Denisovans. And just as with the Neanderthals, you received a genetic inheritance, a set of adaptive gifts that helped you survive in the new and challenging environments you were entering. The most famous of these gifts is what some have called the mountain gene. Today, the people of Tibet are able to live and thrive on the highest plateau on Earth, an environment with 40% less oxygen than at sea level. For most people, prolonged exposure to such thin air leads to altitude sickness and other serious health problems. But the Tibetans are protected by a special version of a gene called EPAS1. This gene variant makes their bodies far more efficient at using the scarce oxygen available. For years, this was a mystery. And then, when the Denisovan genome was sequenced, they found the answer. The Tibetan version of the EPAS1 gene is an almost perfect match for the one found in the Denisovans. This is an incredible story. Your ancestors, struggling to adapt to the high altitudes, met the Denisovans who were already perfectly adapted. Through interbreeding, you inherited their genetic superpower. It is the clearest example we have of a direct, tangible benefit passed from an archaic human to us. And this Denisovan legacy is not just in Tibet. The highest percentages of Denisovan DNA in the world, up to 5%, are found in the modern indigenous populations of Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, and Australia. This tells you that the Denisovans were not just a people of the cold Siberian steppe. They were a successful and widespread group whose domain stretched all the way to the tropical islands of Southeast Asia, where they met and mingled with your ancestors who were making the final push towards the continent of Australia. Your journey eastward and southward continues, a slow migration that unfolds over countless generations. You are now leaving the cold, open steppes of Central Asia behind and entering a new and dramatically different world, the warm, humid, tropical environment of Southeast Asia. You follow the coastlines, adapting your hunting techniques to the dense jungles and the rich marine life. You have faced the powerful Neanderthals in the west and the enigmatic Denisovans in the east. You have learned from them, fought with them, and loved them, carrying their genetic legacy with you. You are a seasoned traveler in a world of many humans, but the next human you might encounter is of a different order entirely. Not a cousin, but something far more ancient, a living echo from the dawn of the human story. To understand the significance of this potential meeting, we need to rewind the clock. Way back. Not 50,000 years, not 500,000 years, but nearly 2 million years. Back to a time when your own species, Homo sapiens, didn't exist even as a hypothetical concept. It was then that a new kind of human first stood tall on the African savanna. We call them Homo erectus, the upright man. And they were the original pioneers, the first great wanderers. They were the first of our lineage to leave Africa, striding out into Asia almost 2 million years ago. They were a staggering, almost unimaginable success story. While we modern humans have been around for about 300,000 years, Homo erectus persisted as a species for nearly 2 million. They outlasted us by a factor of almost 10. And we haven't even finished our run. By the time you and your small band of sapiens arrive in Southeast Asia, around 70,000 years ago, Homo erectus is supposed to be the stuff of legend, a creature of the deep past. They should be nothing more than fossilized bones buried under layers of ancient sediment. But on the Indonesian island of Java, in a place called Ngandong, nestled on a bend in the Solo River. It seems a small, final population of these ancient people has managed to hold on. A lost world of archaic humans surviving into the modern age. For a long time, the age of these Javanese fossils was a mystery. But recent, more sophisticated dating techniques have provided a startlingly clear answer. The scientific evidence shows that the last Homo erectus at Ngandong were alive somewhere between 117,000 and 108,000 years ago. Now, you'll notice those dates don't quite overlap with your arrival in the region. There is a gap of about 40,000 years. 40,000 years is a long time, but in the grand scheme of human evolution, it's the blink of an eye. With every new archaeological discovery in the region, the arrival date of modern humans gets pushed back further and further. The timeline is compressing from both ends. Historians and archaeologists still argue whether a direct encounter was ever possible, but the question is rapidly becoming less about if and more about when and where. So let's imagine it. Let's say a small, isolated group of your people made it to Java earlier than we think. Or that a relict band of erectus survived later than we've found evidence for. You push your way through the dense, humid jungle, the air thick with the scent of orchids and decay. And you see him. He is tall, powerfully built, though more slender than a Neanderthal. His face is strikingly primitive. He has no chin to speak of, a flat, sloping forehead, and a heavy, shelf-like brow ridge that seems to glower even in repose. The feeling you have is completely different from when you met the Neanderthals. This is not a meeting of cousins. This is a meeting across epochs. You are a being of art, of complex symbolic language, of rapidly changing technology, of bows and arrows and fishhooks made from bone. He is a being whose ancestors invented the Acheulean hand axe, a beautiful teardrop-shaped all-purpose tool, and then used that same exact tool, with almost no innovation, for more than 1,000,000 years. He is the master of a technology so ancient it feels like a force of nature. His ancestors were the first to tame fire, a skill they passed down for 100,000 generations. It would be like you, a modern person, meeting a living knight from the Middle Ages. The sense of temporal vertigo would be overwhelming. You are looking at a living piece of the deep past, a ghost from another world who has somehow survived into your own. To understand the being you've just encountered in the jungles of Java, you have to try and comprehend a way of life and a way of thinking that operated on a completely different time scale from your own. The world of Homo erectus was one of incredible stability, a testament to a simple but profoundly effective formula for survival that lasted for 100,000 generations. They were the bedrock of humanity, the long, slow, foundational rhythm against which our own frenetic story would eventually be composed. Physically, they were built for the long haul. Unlike the cold-adapted, stocky Neanderthals, Homo erectus was tall, with long, powerful legs and an efficient, upright stride. The fossil evidence shows they were the first great endurance runners, their bodies perfectly tuned for chasing game over vast distances under the hot sun. Their brains were an intermediate size, averaging around 900 cm3, significantly larger than earlier hominins, but still a good deal smaller than yours or a Neanderthal's. This was a brain and a body that was good enough to conquer the world, from the savannas of Africa to the far corners of Asia. Their success was built on two revolutionary technologies. The first, and most important, was fire. Homo erectus was the first hominin to move beyond opportunistically using natural fires and to truly master and control flame. This is a mainstream historical fact that cannot be overstated. Fire changed everything. It provided warmth, allowing them to survive in colder climates. It offered protection, keeping the great predators of the night at bay. It created a social focus, a hearth to gather around. And most critically, it allowed them to cook their food. Cooking meat and tubers unlocks a huge amount of calories and makes food easier to digest, providing the high-quality fuel necessary to power a large, energy-hungry brain. Your own large brain is, in many ways, a gift from the ancient campfires of Homo erectus. Their second signature technology was the Acheulean hand axe. For over 1 million years, this was the Swiss army knife of the Paleolithic world. It's a beautiful object, a teardrop-shaped piece of flint or chert, flaked on both sides to produce a sharp, symmetrical, all-purpose cutting edge. It could be used for butchering a carcass, digging for roots, stripping bark from wood, or as a defensive weapon. The mental template for creating one was passed down, unchanged, from parent to child for a span of time that is simply too vast for us to properly imagine. And here lies the great puzzle of Homo erectus. While their hand axes were effective, they almost never improved upon the design. For over 1 million years, they made the same tool, in the same way. This incredible technological conservatism is utterly alien to our species, which seems to reinvent itself every few generations. Cognitive archaeologists still debate what this long stasis implies about the erectus mind. Was their way of thinking less innovative, more rigid? Were they simply not capable of the kind of creative leaps that define sapiens? Or is that the wrong way to look at it? Perhaps their design was so perfect for their needs, their way of life so stable and successful, that there was simply no evolutionary pressure to change. There are tantalizing hints of something more complex going on. Archaeologists occasionally find hand axes that are far too large to be practical, or others made from beautiful exotic stone that are found in pristine, unused condition. This has led to a quirky and fascinating fringe theory. Perhaps some of these objects weren't just tools. Perhaps they were also the first expressions of an aesthetic sense, objects valued for their symmetry and beauty. Or maybe they were a form of social currency, a way for a skilled individual to show off their fitness and ability. It's not art as you know it, but it might just be the first flicker of a symbolic, non-practical thought, a quiet appreciation for form that persisted, unchanged, for 1 million years. It suggests a mind that was pragmatic, deeply traditional, and perhaps, in its own way, content. A mind that had found a perfect, enduring balance with its world. Your potential encounter with the ancient Homo erectus plays out on a stage that no longer exists. To understand the world you are now in, you need to forget the modern map of Southeast Asia, with its familiar scatter of islands and peninsulas. During the Ice Age, with sea levels over 120 meters lower than they are today, the world looked very different. The islands of Java, Sumatra, and Borneo, along with the Malay Peninsula, were all connected in a single vast landmass. This sunken continent is known today as Sunda. It was not an archipelago, but the southeasternmost extension of Asia, a tropical world of enormous size and complexity. This is the world you now inhabit. It is a land of extremes, a true paradise and a living hell, often at the same time. The air is thick, wet, and heavy with the smell of sweet, rotting fruit and blooming flowers. Towering rainforests, far denser than anything in Africa, press in on all sides. alive with the cacophony of unseen birds, insects, and monkeys. Great smoldering volcanoes dominate the skyline. Their occasional rumbles a constant reminder of the land's instability. This world is incredibly rich. The rivers teem with fish, the trees are heavy with fruit, and the forests are home to a strange and unique collection of animals: dwarf elephants, giant tigers, and enormous orangutans. But for all its bounty, this world is also singularly dangerous. As a primate from the relatively dry savannas of Africa, you are not prepared for the biological hazards of the deep tropics. You are exposed to a whole new bestiary of parasites, bacteria, and viruses, a microscopic jungle that your immune system is completely unequipped to handle. Every mosquito bite, every scratch from a thorny vine carries the risk of an unfamiliar fever. Your genetic inheritance from the Neanderthals is of little use to you here. You have to adapt, and fast. And somewhere in these dense, challenging jungles, the great human story of interaction continues. Remember the ghost population we found in the DNA of modern West Africans? Well, it turns out there was another ghost haunting the forests of Sunda. The scientific evidence is clear. When geneticists analyze the genomes of modern indigenous peoples from the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, and Australia, they find traces of DNA that don't belong to sapiens, Neanderthals, or the Siberian Denisovans. They find the signature of at least one, and possibly more, unknown archaic human groups. The obvious question, of course, is whether this could be them. Could this be the genetic echo of that momentous, time-bending encounter with the last of the Homo erectus? It's a tantalizing possibility. A handful of children born from a union between your people and theirs would be all it took to pass that ancient lineage into the modern human gene pool. But for now, it remains a ghost story. We have never been able to recover DNA from a Homo erectus fossil, so we have nothing to compare it to. Geneticists and paleoanthropologists are currently trying to determine if this genetic ghost could finally be the signature of Homo erectus, or if it represents yet another unknown human species that lived and thrived in the tropics of Asia. Your people, however, are not content to stay on the vast continent of Sunda. You have followed the coastline to its very edge. Before you lies the open ocean. But on the horizon, on a clear day, you can see the hazy, mountainous tops of another chain of islands. This is not a simple channel to be crossed. Even with the sea levels at their lowest, a deep oceanic trench, known today as the Wallace Line, maintained a permanent water barrier. To cross it required more than just a log raft. It required a boat. It required planning. It required the courage to push off from the shore you know and paddle deliberately into the unknown, a feat of navigation and abstract thought that no human species before you had ever accomplished. And on those islands, isolated from the rest of the world for millions of years, evolution has been running some very strange experiments. You and your small group have done it. You have paddled across the deep water channel, a feat of courage and ingenuity never before achieved. You have landed your simple boats on the shore of a new island, a world unto itself. The plants are strange, the animals are unfamiliar. You have stepped off the continent of Sunda and into a series of isolated evolutionary laboratories. You have entered the lost world of Wallacea. Let's fast forward to 2003. A joint team of Indonesian and Australian archaeologists is working in a massive, cathedral-like cave on the island of Flores, one of the very islands you have just landed on. The cave is called Liang Bua, the Cool Cave, and the team is digging in search of the remains of the first modern humans to colonize Australia. They are working their way down through the layers of sediment, pulling out stone tools and the bones of extinct animals. Then, about 6 meters down, they find something. A skeleton. It's small, clearly a hominin, and they assume it's a child. But as the delicate bones are cleared of dirt, the lead paleoanthropologist Mike Morwood notices something isn't right. The teeth are heavily worn. The skull bones are fully fused. This is not a child. This is a fully grown adult. An adult that stood barely a meter, or 3.5 feet, tall. The discovery sent a seismic shockwave through the world of paleoanthropology. The skeleton, belonging to a female, was so small, so strange, that it defied all existing categories. The scientific community scrambled to make sense of it, giving it the official designation Homo floresiensis. But the world would come to know it by a much simpler and more evocative name: the Hobbit. Her skull housed a brain of only about 400 cm 3. That's no bigger than a chimpanzee's, and on par with the small-brained Homo naledi we met back in Africa. Her feet were disproportionately large for her small body. Her wrists were strangely primitive, yet her facial features were more delicate and modern-looking than an ancient Homo erectus. The discovery was so bizarre that for years, a fierce debate raged in the scientific community. Some prominent scientists refused to believe it was a new species at all, arguing instead that it must have been a modern Homo sapiens who suffered from a pathological condition like microcephaly, which results in an abnormally small head. But as more remains were found, all showing the same unique set of traits, the conclusion became inescapable. This was a distinct and very strange species of human. So how did this happen? The answer lies in the island itself. Flores was an evolutionary experiment operating under a principle known as the island rule, or insular dwarfism. On isolated islands with limited resources and fewer predators, large animals tend to evolve to become smaller over many generations. It's a way of adapting to a more constrained environment. And Flores was a textbook example. The archaeologists at Liangbua didn't just find the Hobbit. They found the bones of the animals it lived with. This included a pygmy version of an ancient elephant-like creature called the stegodon. These were tiny elephants, no bigger than a modern cow, that roamed the forests of Flores. The humans who hunted them, it seems, had shrunk right along with them. Scientists are still debating their ancestry. Are they the dwarfed descendants of the ancient Homo erectus, who somehow made it across the water to Flores hundreds of thousands of years earlier? Or, as some evidence suggests, do they come from an even earlier, more primitive hominin migration out of Africa, one we have no other record of? Whatever their origin, the most challenging and fascinating thing about the hobbits is what they were capable of. Lying right there with their tiny skeletons were clusters of well-made stone tools, sharp flakes, points, and blades. And nearby were the bones of the pygmy stegodon, some of them showing clear-cut marks from those very tools. The evidence is clear. These tiny people, with their chimp-sized brains, were cooperatively hunting elephants. They were master toolmakers and effective hunters, performing tasks that we once thought were the exclusive domain of large-brained humans like ourselves. Once again, a lost relative rises from the past to challenge our most basic assumptions about what it takes to be human, and to make you wonder just what kind of people you are about to meet in the strange, isolated forests of this new island world. The timeline is not a matter of speculation. The scientific dating of the layers in Liangbua Cave is clear. The remains of Homo floresiensis, the tools they made, and the pygmy elephants they hunted are found in layers stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. right up until about 50,000 years ago. And 50,000 years ago is the very moment that you, Homo sapiens, are making your presence felt in this part of the world. Your people are island hopping their way towards Australia. An encounter was not just possible, it was inevitable. The last of the hobbits would have looked up to see the tall, slender figures of your ancestors appearing on their shores. The two most extreme products of human evolution, the tallest, lankiest, largest-brained species, and the shortest, smallest-brained species, were about to meet. Let's place you in that moment. You have been on the island of Flores for a few weeks. You are learning its ways, the strange fruits, the unfamiliar animals. You are tracking one of the pygmy stegodon through the dense, humid jungle, pushing aside giant ferns that drip with moisture. You move as quietly as you can, your spear at the ready. Then you stop. Ahead, in a small clearing, you see them. A small family group is crouched around a kill of their own, a giant rat the size of a dog. Your first thought is that you have stumbled upon a group of lost children. They are so small, barely reaching your waist. But as you watch from the shadows, you see that their faces are not the faces of children. They are weathered and mature. The males have beards. Their bodies are wiry and strong, and they move with a fluid, confident grace in this forest that is their home. They communicate with each other in a series of clicks and soft, murmuring sounds, a language utterly alien to your ears. You are paralyzed by a profound sense of cognitive dissonance. They are clearly people. They have a fire. They have tools. They have a language. But they are also so impossibly, shockingly small. What do? Do you step out into the clearing? Do you retreat in fear and confusion? Is this a rival to be eliminated, a resource to be exploited, or a wonder to be respected? This encounter, and the relationship that followed, may not be entirely lost to time. It may have survived, in a distorted form, into the modern age. When Dutch colonists first arrived on Flores in the 19th century, they recorded the local legends of the Nage people. The stories told of a race of little people who had lived on the island long ago. They called them the Ebu Gogo, which means the grandmother who eats anything. According to the tales, the Ebu Gogo were small, hairy, and walked with an awkward gait. They lived in caves, murmured to each other in their own language, and would reputedly steal food from the villages of the tall Nage people. The legends say that the Nage tolerated the Ebu Gogo for a long time, but eventually grew tired of their thievery. They tricked them into accepting a gift of palm fibers to make clothing, and when the Ebu Gogo took the fibers into their cave, the Naga threw a firebrand inside, setting it ablaze. The story is eerily specific. Anthropologists and folklorists are divided on whether the Ebu Gogo stories could possibly be a preserved cultural memory of Homo floresiensis. It seems almost too incredible to be true, but the parallels are tantalizing. A small, human-like creature with its own language, living in caves, and a story of a final violent conflict with the tall people who came to the island. Whether the legends are true or not, the archaeological record tells its own stark story. The bones of the hobbits, their tools, and all evidence of their long, unique existence on the island of Flores come to an abrupt end almost exactly at the point when the first evidence of Homo sapiens appears. They survived for hundreds of thousands of years through volcanic eruptions and the strange ebb and flow of their island world. But they did not, it seems, survive us. The reason for their disappearance is unknown. Perhaps it was a violent conflict, as the legends suggest. Perhaps it was simple competition for resources, a contest the small hobbits could never win against their larger, more technologically advanced cousins. Or perhaps we brought diseases that their isolated immune systems had no defense against. We do not know. All we know is that after 50,000 years ago, the forests of Flores fell silent, and another unique way of being human vanished from the earth forever. For a long time after its discovery, the Hobbit of Flores was seen as a complete anomaly. It was a bizarre, one-of-a-kind evolutionary freak, an outlier so strange it could almost be dismissed as a side note to the main story of human evolution. It was a fascinating puzzle, but surely it was a one-off. The chances of evolution producing another, completely separate, lost world of strange, small-bodied humans on another isolated island seemed impossibly remote. And then, in 2019, lightning struck twice. The story moves north, from the island of Flores to the even larger island of Luzon in the Philippines. In a place called Calao Cave, a team of archaeologists had, over several years, been unearthing a small collection of intriguing fossils. The find was frustratingly scant. It consisted of just 7 teeth and 6 small bones from the hands and feet. But what was there was enough to tell an electrifying new story. In 2019, the team announced their conclusion to the world. These few humble bones belonged to yet another previously unknown species of human. They named it Homo luzonensis, after the island where it made its home. Like the Denisovans, this is a species known more from its strange characteristics than from a complete picture. We have no full skull, so we can't know the exact size of their brain, though they were almost certainly small-bodied, likely standing under 4 feet tall, similar to the hobbits. But the anatomy of the few bones we do have paints a bizarre and fascinating picture. They are another mosaic creature, another evolutionary collage. The teeth, for example, are a strange mix. The molars are small and simple, very much like those of a modern human. But the premolars have features, like the number of roots, that are more in common with much more ancient hominins like the Australopithecines. The most revealing parts, however, are the bones from the hands and feet. The finger and toe bones, the phalanges, are distinctly curved. This is a feature seen in tree-dwelling apes and in some of the earliest, most primitive hominins. It is a clear scientific sign of an adaptation for climbing. Unlike you, with your feet perfectly adapted for walking and running on the ground, Homo luzonensis seems to have been very much at home in the trees. You can picture them moving through the forest canopy, a human-like creature with an arboreal grace that your own ancestors had long since lost. And here is the quirky, mind-bending tidbit. One of the foot bones they found looks almost identical to one belonging to a 3.2 million-year-old Australopithecus, the famous Lucy from Ethiopia. The resemblance is so striking that it has left scientists scratching their heads. The great debate now is whether Homo luzonensis evolved these primitive climbing features as a new adaptation to the forested island environment, or if they represent the descendants of an incredibly ancient migration out of Africa, perhaps even before the first great wave of Homo erectus. It's a possibility that would completely rewrite our understanding of early human dispersal. The discovery of Homo luzonensis is, in many ways, even more profound than that of the Hobbit. Finding one evolutionary oddity can be dismissed as a fluke. Finding 2 proves a pattern. It tells us that what happened on Flores was not an exception, but an example of a rule. It shows that when isolated on these islands, human populations, cut off from the continental gene pool, could evolve in radical and unpredictable new directions. The islands of Southeast Asia were a crucible of human diversity, a laboratory where evolution was free to tinker and experiment with the human form. This is the bigger picture, the crucial takeaway from these island discoveries. They are the final, definitive proof that the story of human evolution is not the clean, linear march of progress we once imagined. It is not a tall, straight tree, with a single trunk leading inevitably to us at the top. It is, as we said at the very beginning, a dense, tangled, and thorny bush, with branches sprouting and twisting in all directions. Some of those branches, like yours, grew long and strong. Others, like the Neanderthals and Denisovans, grew alongside us for a time before withering. And some, like the strange island hobbits and the climbers of Luzon, were unique, flowering shoots that blossomed in isolation, revealing a diversity to the human family that we are only just beginning to comprehend. For this entire journey, we have been exploring a world that is, in its own way, a kind of paradise of human diversity. A world where your sapiens ancestors could walk from Africa to Europe and meet the Neanderthals. A world where they could push east and encounter the mysterious Denisovans. A world where they could sail to distant islands and come face to face with the tiny Hobbits of Flores and the climbing people of Luzon. A world where the ancient ghosts of Homo erectus might still have been lingering in the deep jungles. This world, with its tangled bush of humanity, was the norm for hundreds of thousands of years. It was the only world your ancestors knew. And then it ended. The turning point happens with breathtaking speed. In the grand scheme of geological time, it's a snap of the fingers. Around 40,000 years ago, a great silence begins to fall across the planet. In Europe, the last Neanderthal campfires go out. In Asia, the genetic trail of the Denisovans fades to black. On the islands of Indonesia, the hobbits vanish from their caves. One by one, every other kind of human disappears from the Earth. The rich, diverse, multi-human planet that had existed for millions of years is gone, replaced by a world populated by a single, ascendant species. A world populated only by you. This is the great mystery at the heart of our story, the Great Replacement. And there is a prime suspect in this planetary disappearance. The evidence is circumstantial, but it is overwhelming. The timing is just too perfect. The decline and fall of every other human species on Earth coincides almost exactly with the arrival and expansion of Homo sapiens into their territory. For millennia, they had survived ice ages, supervolcanoes, and countless other existential threats. But they could not, it seems, survive us. This forces us to ask the most difficult and profound question of all. Why? Why us? What was our secret weapon? What advantage did your ancestors possess that allowed them, a relatively new species from Africa, to so completely and utterly replace every other human competitor on the globe? Was it a single, decisive advantage, or a combination of many small ones? The next part of our journey will be an investigation into this question, an exploration of the theories that attempt to explain our lonely victory. The first, most direct, and most disturbing theory is that this was no accident of evolution. It was a conquest, an extermination, a prehistoric war of the worlds, fought not with spaceships and lasers, but with spears and stones in the valleys and plains of the Ice Age. Did your ancestors, upon meeting these other humans, see them not as family, but as rivals to be eliminated? Did you wage the first and only multi-species world war, a 30,000-year-long campaign of genocide? It's an easy narrative to imagine. Your people, perhaps with more sophisticated language, could organize in larger numbers. Your thrown spears gave you a deadly advantage over the close-quarters tactics of the Neanderthals. In this view, every encounter was a battle, every shared valley a front line. Your ancestors were the unstoppable invasive species, systematically hunting, murdering, and outcompeting the native human populations until none were left. There is some evidence to support this. We have the Neanderthal at Shanidar with a projectile wound. Other isolated skeletons, both sapiens and Neanderthal, show signs of violence. Conflict certainly happened, but was it a systematic war? The archaeological evidence for that is surprisingly thin. If there was a continent-spanning war that lasted for millennia, we would expect to see more signs of it. Mass graves filled with the bodies of slaughtered Neanderthals. Fortified sapiens settlements built for defense. A clear pattern of trauma on the bones. But we don't. The evidence for violence is sporadic, localized. The true nature and scale of Paleolithic violence is a subject of intense scholarly debate, but it doesn't look like the kind of organized total war we might imagine. The truth is likely more subtle. It may not have been a war of extermination, but a war of attrition. Your people didn't have to win every fight. You just had to win slightly more often than you lost. A small, persistent advantage in skirmishes over territory or resources, compounded over thousands of years, could have the same ultimate effect as a planned genocide, slowly pushing the other human populations into marginal lands and eventually into extinction. But violence alone, it seems, is not the whole answer. The weapon that made us so successful might not have been the spear in our hand, but something else entirely. If it wasn't a simple story of conquest, then perhaps your advantage was more subtle. Perhaps you were not a better fighter, but a better inventor, a more efficient hunter. This is the second major theory, that you won not through malice, but through a superior toolkit and better tactics. It argues that your secret weapon was a technological revolution that the other humans, for all their intelligence, never matched. Let's look at the evidence. The Neanderthal toolkit, the Mysterian, was ingenious and effective, as we've discussed, but it was also remarkably stable for over 200,000 years. Your Sapiens toolkit, by contrast, was in a state of constant, frenetic innovation. You were restlessly tinkering, always looking for a better way. You worked with a wider range of materials, not just stone, but bone, antler, and ivory. You invented new tools for new tasks. Bone needles for sewing tailored, close-fitting clothing that offered better protection from the cold. Fish hooks and nets for exploiting rivers and coastlines. Bird snares for catching small, fast prey. The scientific evidence from isotope analysis of bones confirms this. While Neanderthals had a diet heavily focused on big game, your diet was much broader. You were a generalist, a jack of all trades, able to exploit a much wider slice of the ecosystem. But the single most important invention, the true game changer, was in how you hunted. It was the birth of true projectile technology. Your ancestors invented the spear thrower, known by its Aztec name, the Atlatl. It's a simple but brilliant device, essentially a stick with a hook or a cup at the end that cradles the butt of a light spear or dart. By using the Atlatl as a lever, you could extend the length of your arm, launching the dart with far more velocity and over a much greater distance than you ever could by hand alone. Later, you would perfect this concept with the invention of the bow and arrow. This was a revolution. Remember the Neanderthal hunter? with his heavy thrusting spear, forced into a dangerous close-quarters dance with a wounded bison. Remember their skeletons, riddled with the kinds of injuries we see on rodeo riders? Your invention of ranged weapons changed that entire dynamic. You could hunt from a safe distance of 30, 40, or even 50 meters. You could stay out of range of thrashing hooves and sharp horns. Hunting became safer, more efficient, and more successful. This technological edge, even a small one, compounded over thousands of years and thousands of hunts, would have given your population a massive advantage. But even this might not be the whole story. Perhaps your greatest advantage wasn't a piece of technology at all. Perhaps your true superpower was social. You were a better friend. The evidence suggests that Neanderthals and other archaic humans lived in small, relatively isolated family clans. Your sapiens ancestors, on the other hand, built vast social networks that stretched across entire landscapes. How do we know this? One of the quirkiest and most compelling lines of evidence comes from seashells. At your ancient campsites, archaeologists find beads and ornaments made from specific types of seashells. The strange thing is, these sites can be hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometers inland. Those shells didn't walk there. They are the tangible proof of a vast, continent-spanning network of trade, gift-giving, and alliance. They are the fossilized remains of a social safety net. Think about what this means. If the mammoth herd failed to show up in a Neanderthal clan's valley one winter, they would starve. If the same thing happened to your clan, you could call on your allies in the next valley, or your distant cousins over the mountains, for help. You shared information, resources, and genes across a huge area. The precise cognitive and linguistic differences that allowed for these vast social networks are still debated, but their effects are undeniable. This interconnectedness was held together by your explosion of symbolic culture, the complex cave art, the portable sculptures, the bone flutes for making music. These things weren't just hobbies, they were the social glue, the shared rituals and stories that bound thousands of individuals together into a single, cohesive supergroup that could out-cooperate any small, isolated clan. Your true secret weapon wasn't a sharper spear, it was a larger circle of friends. Your advantages in technology and social networking were profound, but they might not have been enough on their own. It's possible that your ultimate success was clinched by two final, invisible allies that you carried with you: a changing climate and the germs in your own body. These factors may have tipped the scales, turning a long, drawn-out competition into a rapid and final replacement. Let's look at the climate first. The period between 60,000 and 30,000 years ago, when you were spreading across the world and the other humans were vanishing, was not a time of stable weather. The scientific evidence from Greenland ice cores shows that the climate was swinging wildly and violently. These are known as Dansgaard-Oeschger events. They were not slow, gradual shifts. The average temperature in the northern hemisphere could plummet or soar by as much as 10 degrees Celsius in the span of a single human lifetime. Forests could become grasslands, and grasslands could become frozen tundra with breathtaking speed. For a specialist species like the Neanderthals, this was a catastrophe. They were masters of a specific environment, the cold, subarctic world of the Ice Age megafauna. Their bodies, their tools, their entire culture was exquisitely adapted for hunting mammoths and woolly rhinos. When the climate suddenly warmed and the great herds moved north or died out, their highly specialized way of life began to fail them. They were experts in a world that kept disappearing. You, on the other hand, were a professional generalist. You were the scrappy, adaptable newcomer. As we saw, your toolkit was diverse. allowing you to switch from hunting bison to snaring rabbits to catching fish. Your wide social network meant you were more resilient, better able to absorb the shock of a sudden environmental change. The chaotic, unpredictable climate of the late Pleistocene was a disaster for the specialists, but it was a world perfectly suited to a flexible, quick-thinking opportunist like you. You didn't just survive the chaos, you thrived in it. The final weapon in your arsenal was the most subtle and perhaps the most deadly of all. You carried diseases. Your species was born and raised in the tropical melting pot of Africa, the most pathogen-rich environment on Earth. For hundreds of thousands of years, your immune system had been in a constant arms race with a dizzying array of viruses, bacteria, and parasites. You were a walking reservoir of germs that, to you, might have caused only a mild fever or a cough, but to which other human populations had absolutely no natural immunity. We have seen this tragic story play out in our own recorded history. When European colonists arrived in the Americas, they brought with them diseases like smallpox and measles. These were common childhood illnesses in Europe, but to the indigenous populations of the Americas, who had never been exposed to them, they were apocalyptic plagues, wiping out an estimated 90% of the population. It's a chillingly plausible scenario that you and your ancestors, as you moved into Europe and Asia, unknowingly unleashed a similar great dying upon the Neanderthals and Denisovans. Their immune systems, adapted to the colder, less pathogen-dense north, were suddenly confronted with a wave of unfamiliar tropical diseases. It may have been a prehistoric pandemic that swept through their small, isolated clans, leaving them too weakened and depopulated to effectively compete. So, what's the final verdict in the case of the great human replacement? Scholars will likely always debate the relative importance of each factor, but the truth is, there was no single cause. There was no one secret weapon. The end of the other humans was a death by 1,000 cuts, a perfect storm of converging pressures. It was a little bit of violence. It was a superior toolkit and the advantage of ranged weapons. It was a larger, more cooperative social world. It was a volatile climate that punished specialists. And it was a devastating package of new germs. Your ancestors didn't necessarily have to be smarter, or stronger, or more malicious. You just had to arrive. Your very presence, with your new tools, your new social structures, and your new diseases, in a world already stressed by a chaotic climate, was enough. You were the final, unbearable pressure, the feather that broke the back of a system that was already straining. You didn't so much conquer the world as create a set of conditions so new and so challenging that no other kind of human could survive in your wake. And so the perfect storm you created, or perhaps simply embodied, passes. The world settles. And in the aftermath, a profound and unprecedented quiet descends upon the planet. For the first time in at least 4 million years, since the very dawn of our bipedal ancestors, there is only one species of human walking the earth. From the frozen shores of the Arctic to the southern tip of South America, which your descendants will soon reach, the planet is home to only Homo sapiens. The great, messy, vibrant, and competitive family reunion is over. The great silence has begun. Imagine yourself in this new world, perhaps 30,000 years ago. You look out from your camp at the vast, empty landscape. For your entire life, and the lives of your parents and grandparents, the world has been emptying out. The other people, the ones your elders spoke of, are gone. The valleys that once held their campfires are dark. The trails that once bore their strange footprints are overgrown. you are for the first time completely and utterly alone. Is it a feeling of triumph? Of relief? Or is it a new and unsettling kind of loneliness? A sense that the world has somehow become smaller, less mysterious? We tend to frame our survival as the ultimate evolutionary victory. The fittest, the smartest, the best survived. But it's also worth pausing to consider what was lost. With the last Neanderthal, a unique way of seeing and thinking about the world vanished forever. A mind that was perhaps more visual, more attuned to the present moment, was extinguished. With the last Denisovan, we lost the secrets of a lineage that had conquered and adapted to the whole of Asia, from its highest mountains to its tropical coasts. With the last Hobbit, a testament to evolution's strange creativity, a solution to being human on a completely different scale, was erased. We lost entire universes of human experience. Our victory was also a profound and irreversible loss of diversity. And this victory has a strange paradox at its heart. As your species spread out to become the sole ruler of the entire globe, it was also becoming genetically impoverished. This is the great historical fact of the out of Africa bottleneck. The small number of founders who left Africa carried with them only a tiny fraction of the total genetic diversity of our species. The scientific evidence for this is undeniable. There is more genetic diversity in a single troop of chimpanzees, or within the human populations of Africa today, than there is in the entire rest of the world combined. Billions of people, from the Andes to Japan, are all the descendants of that one small, brave band that we followed out of the homeland. We are a global empire built from a village. But did the memory of that older, more diverse world linger? Did the ghosts of our lost cousins haunt the minds of our ancestors long after they were physically gone? This leads to one of the most romantic and speculative ideas in all of human prehistory. As you sit around the fire, telling stories to your children, what tales do you tell of the past? The idea that mythology might contain a kernel of deep historical or paleontological memory is highly speculative and not accepted by all scholars, but it is a delicious thought. Could the enduring myths of trolls and dwarves in the dark forests of northern Europe be a faint, distorted echo of the stocky, powerful, cave-dwelling Neanderthals? Are the stories of elves beautiful but otherworldly beings, a memory of the initial, strange encounters? When we hear the folk tales from Flores of the Ebu Gogo, the little people of the forest, are we hearing a 50,000-year-old story about the hobbits? Could the figures of the wild men of the woods, the Sasquatch or the Yeti, be a cultural memory of the last, elusive Denisovans or other relict populations, clinging on in the most remote parts of the world? We can never know for sure. But it is a powerful idea. That long after the last of our cousins had vanished from the earth, their memory lived on, transformed into myth and legend. A whisper in our collective consciousness, a folk memory of a time that we have otherwise completely forgotten. A time when magic was real, when monsters and other peoples walked the earth. A time when you were not alone. The stories of our lost cousins may have faded into the realm of myth, but their physical presence never truly left us. We have been searching for their ghosts in the landscape, but the whole time, their most tangible legacy has been hiding within us. Those brief moments of connection, of interbreeding, that happened tens of thousands of years ago, were not an evolutionary dead end. They were an injection of new genetic code that has been passed down through every subsequent generation, shaping our biology in ways we are only just beginning to understand. Let's revisit that genetic inheritance, not as a simple fact, but as a living, breathing part of your own body. Let's call it the good, the bad, and the itchy. First, the good. As we touched on before, the greatest gift you received from both Neanderthals and Denisovans was an immune system upgrade. Your African ancestors had a robust immune system, but it was tailored to African diseases. When you arrived in Eurasia, you were bombarded by a whole new set of pathogens. The Neanderthals, having lived there for hundreds of thousands of years, were already adapted. The genes they gave you, particularly a family of genes that code for something called toll-like receptors, act as the sentinels of your immune system. They are the first line of defense, recognizing and attacking invading viruses and bacteria. Acquiring these pre-adapted genes was a life-saving shortcut, allowing your people to survive and thrive in a new, hostile environment. Now, for the bad. Some of the genes that were beneficial in the past have become liabilities in the present. Scientists are still working to understand the complex interplay between these ancient genes and modern environmental factors, but some links are becoming clear. You inherited a Neanderthal gene that makes your blood clot more quickly. In the Paleolithic, where a deep cut from a flint tool or an animal's horn was a constant risk, this was a fantastic adaptation. Faster clotting meant you were less likely to bleed to death from an injury. In our modern sedentary world, however, where we are more likely to suffer from heart disease and strokes, this same trait can increase the risk of dangerous blood clots forming in our arteries. Similarly, other Neanderthal gene variants have been linked to an increased risk for depression and even nicotine addiction. These traits are incredibly complex, of course, but it's a humbling thought that some of our modern struggles have roots in the ancient DNA we carry. And then there's the itchy. One of the clearest legacies of the Neanderthal immune system is its connection to allergies. Their immune systems were on a hair trigger, constantly fighting off infections from soil-borne parasites and animal-borne diseases. In our modern, hyper-sanitized world, that powerful, vigilant immune system sometimes gets bored. With no real threats to fight, it can overreact to harmless substances like pollen, dust mites, or cat dander, triggering the inflammatory response we know as an allergic reaction. So, if you suffer from hay fever, you can, in a strange way, thank your inner Neanderthal for an immune system that is just a little too good at its job. Nowhere has this ancient inheritance felt more immediate than in the last few years with the COVID-19 pandemic. In one of the most astonishing scientific discoveries of recent times, researchers found that the single biggest genetic risk factor for developing severe COVID-19 is a chunk of DNA on chromosome 3 that was inherited from a Neanderthal. People with this gene variant were significantly more likely to require hospitalization. It was a shocking reminder that our evolutionary history can have life or death consequences. And in a perfect illustration of the complex nature of this legacy, scientists later found another Neanderthal gene segment on a different chromosome that does the exact opposite. It offers significant protection against severe infection. This is the living, breathing reality of our hybrid nature. The Neanderthals and Denisovans are not truly gone. They are an integral part of our biology. Every time your skin tans, or burns, in the sun, you are feeling the influence of their skin pigmentation genes. Every time you fight off a cold, you are using the tools their immune system gave you. They are in our blood, our skin, our very cells. They are a constant, whispering reminder of a time when the world was shared. A time when our human story was not the only human story. And so, we arrive at the end of our journey, but not at the end of the story. Because the most exciting part of this entire saga is that it is still being written. The book of our human family is a living document, with new pages being added every single year. Think about the discoveries we have journeyed through tonight. The official scientific paper announcing Homo naledi to the world was published in 2015. Homo luzonensis was announced in 2019. The Denisovans were completely unknown to science before 2010. The world of our lost relatives is not a cold, dead subject locked away in dusty museum cabinets. It is a vibrant, active field of discovery, and the story is changing under our very feet. Just in 2021, another potential new character was added to the drama. Scientists in China finally analyzed a massive, beautifully preserved fossil skull that had been hidden in a well for over 80 years. Nicknamed Dragon Man, its anatomy is a unique mix of primitive and modern features. Some have assigned it to a new species, Homo longi. Whether Homo longi is a truly distinct species or a very robust Denisovan is still a subject of lively scientific discussion, but its very existence proves that the human family tree in Asia was even more complex than we knew. And the future of these discoveries is only getting stranger and more exciting. We are moving beyond the need for bones. Scientists are now perfecting techniques to extract ancient environmental DNA directly from the sediment on a cave floor. We can now tell if a Neanderthal or a Denisovan walked through a particular cave thousands of years ago, just from the microscopic traces of DNA they shed in their skin and waste, what some are calling dirt DNA. The next new human species might not be found by a paleoanthropologist with a brush, but by a geneticist in a clean room analyzing a spoonful of ancient soil. There are almost certainly more cousins, more ghosts, waiting to be found in the unexplored caves and unsequenced genomes of the world. But for now, the story we have is this. You are the last survivor of a once brilliantly diverse family. Your species' story is not one of a solo, triumphant march to greatness. It is a complex family drama of encounters, of competition, of violence, of love, of coexistence, and of mingling. You are not a pure-blooded conqueror. You are a hybrid, a composite. You are the inheritor of the resilience of the Neanderthals, the adaptability of the Denisovans, and the restless, wandering spirit of your own sapiens ancestors. You carry the genetic ghosts of our lost cousins within your own cells. They are not entirely gone, because they are a part of us. They shaped your biology, and the memory of their existence may have shaped your deepest myths. Their story is our story, and now the journey is over. The great cold plains of the Ice Age begin to fade, the immense herds of mammoth and bison dissolving back into the mists of deep time. The flickering light of those ancient campfires, where you saw the faces of so many other kinds of human, now dims and softens. The chill in the air is replaced by the gentle warmth and comfort of your own bed, in your own time. The great struggles for survival, the long and winding migrations, the profound mystery of meeting another kind of mind. All of that is in the past. Your journey is done for the night, and you have found a safe place to rest. Let the echoes of that lost world, with all its wonder and all its strangeness, gently recede. Let your mind become as quiet and as still as a silent cave, holding the memory of all that has passed. There is nothing left for you to do now, but to let go of the day, to feel the gentle pull of sleep, and to drift into your own quiet darkness, carrying the deep, unbroken story of humanity with you as you rest.